Hello, this is Mr. Berto, and I'm going to be walking you through our Force Investigation Lab. It's our assignment for session 16, so if you go to our Canvas page and to our modules for Unit 3 Forces, you'll find session 16 down here. You can click on and access. Going to the last slide in our slide deck, will give you instructions on what to do. What I want us to do is to use our box simulation from our GeoGebra page. I'm opening that right now, and you are going to make a copy of our lab sheet here. I'm opening up this tab, and what I'm going to do is, in order to make it easier to look at both of these pages at the same time, is use double screen. All right, so I want to draw your attention to a few things. On our Force Investigation Lab, this is a Google Sheet. It's going to allow you to input information as well as data. Now there's a bar down here that you can move. Most of the boxes should be readily available to see on your screen. Below this bar are different tabs, that say Part 1 Observation, Part 2 Predictions, Part 3 Data, Part 4 More Data, and Part 5 Analysis. For session 16, I'm asking you to finish up to Part 4 More Data. I'd like us to share our results before we start talking about analysis. So the instructions for Part 1 Observations are to include your name and your period here on our Google Sheet, and then to write down what you notice, what you wonder about, what the simulation reminds you of, and how the simulation could be used. There are certain quantities and definitions that I'd like you to find. You can find them listed here on the side. So we have tension, mass, theta are a few examples. You can also include these values here, acceleration and velocity. I'd like you to write down the symbol that the simulator uses for these values, as well as what tools or equipment or methods can be used to measure these values. And finally, the units for each of these. For part 2, our second page, there are research questions. What I'd like you to do is try and think of research questions that you can ask. So if we are testing force using this simulation, we could ask, how does a particular variable depend on another variable? And I'd like you to label whether they are dependent variables or independent variables. If you are afraid and you're not quite sure, you can skip ahead to Part 3 and Part 4, which will ask our research questions. One other thing that we have to keep in mind is that we want to look for constants. These are values or variables that we are going to keep the same. I'm asking you to find at least 3 things that you will keep the same when using this simulator. We also want to look at our predictions. As force increases, I predict that perhaps it will be something that increases at a constant rate. Perhaps it is something that will increase at an exponential rate. Perhaps it is something that will decrease. And what I'd like you to do is to draw a picture. There are pictures down here that give you an example of different data relationships, but I'd like you to draw your own. You can do that by going to the Insert tab at the top of our Google Sheet bar and insert a drawing. In this part, you can use lines in order to draw a quick graph And perhaps you say, well, I think that our line is going to increase in a linear or it's going to increase in a linear fashion. Well, you can draw that by using a line and drawing a quick rough line. And you feel free to use a different color and to change how thick the line is so that it's easier to see. I'd also like you to label these parts if you're talking about as mass increases. Say you believe that force will also increase. I'm just going to shorten my text box here and make sure that you're labeling your axes. Now, if you can't draw a straight line, you can also use this to draw a scribble. I'm going to delete this line, and this option is by clicking the down arrow, drawing a scribble. It will allow you to draw a curve. And just like before, you can change the color and change the thickness of the line. So please draw a picture that matches up with your prediction in these green boxes. And I have my picture right here. And please make sure that you put it somewhere where I can see it. So for part 3, you have a research question. You'll notice that this is going to be very similar to the questions that you were filling out in step 2. And it's going to ask you to record information. So this research question number 1, how does acceleration depend on mass? Masses are independent variable. We're going to be changing it. So in this simulator, you can only increase the mass up to 5 kilograms. These numbers in the boxes are placeholders. So what I'd like you to do is to choose steady values that you can use to increase as you go up here. So you may decide to do half weights. You may decide to do quarter weights in order to, in order to measure up all of the masses here. These values entered for acceleration, you are going to want to record that down here. You'll see the acceleration in the bottom left corner of your simulator, and you'll want to record that for each of your masses and look at the relationship that we have. Is it a linear relationship? Is it an exponential relationship? That's up to you to see. Part 4 is very similar, except this time you will be depending on force. I want to draw your attention to 2 very important things. First, on part 3, our coefficients of friction should be dropped all the way down to 0. For part 4, our coefficients of friction still stay 0, but we also want to drop theta all the way down to 0, so that we are only dealing with a force being pulled in one direction. So that is how to do our force investigation lab. Thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please refer to the class meeting recording in our Microsoft Teams page. Good luck.